going to kick us off with the first question.
Thank you all for coming out tonight. So for the first question, it's, can you share a story from your childhood that stands out as an influential moment and has shaped your perspective today? And I guess we can start off with Professor Mubarak.
Thank you, Zach, and thank you all for this invitation. I'm honored to see so many colleagues and friends on the I was about to say Zoom call, but Ring Central call. So this is a difficult question because I can't think of a specific story from my childhood, but I will say that as an adolescent, one of the events that most shaped my trajectory and my work has been the tragic event of 9/11. And the reason this shaped my trajectory in my career and my work to the extent that it did, I mean, there's so many reasons. Obviously, on one hand, you know, it was an attack on our nation. And for my generation, I was a sophomore in college. I'll never forget that day. I was on campus and, you know, just the piercing events of that day and this kind of this shatter. I felt like my generation, we lost our sense of innocence and sense of security. But as a Muslim American, before I was allowed to shed my tears and grieve, I immediately felt that I was placed on the defense seat, right? That my entire religion and faith tradition was put on trial. And it was the first time that I also recognized my own displacement in the American public consciousness. And what I mean by that is that although I was born and raised in the United States and I knew no other place as home, I began to realize that other people did not perceive me as being American. And as politicians and media pundits began to draw this kind of binary between us and them, I began to recognize that many in my own society, many of my own fellow citizens did not look at me as part of us. And so those days were very confusing. There were a lot of things that happened, but I know that the presence of professors, this was my sophomore year. I was fortunate because I had already been there for a year at Florida State, and I had already, you know, established a lot of connections. And so honestly, I'm so fortunate that I had the professors that I had who actually invited me to speak to their classes. And I felt like it was the first time that I got to share my story and that I could kind of, in a sense, normalize my existence, if that made any sense. You know, I grew up in the South. My mom wore a headscarf. I remember when I was 3 years old, you know, people shouting obscenities at my mother. And then when I wore a headscarf, obviously, I think I didn't face as much discrimination as my mother did because she was an immigrant, right? And English was new to her, but still, you know, so I guess what I want to say about my professors is that they really kind of gave me a platform to come and talk about what it's like to be a Muslim in America. And I remember our mosque being attacked, and it was attacked in March 2002, just about 15 minutes after I walked out of there. And the man who attacked the mosque, he said since he couldn't join the army, he wanted to basically fight Muslims at home. That was the message he told the police when they caught him. But then within the next few days, I'll never forget the outpour of support we received from the wider community. I remember kind of cleaning up the debris with a Jewish couple, with a Christian couple, side by side, people bringing flowers, people literally carrying with their own bare hands the debris and bags of things that were destroyed at the mosque with the Muslim community. And so I think the events of that time for me as an adolescent, you know, I was about, I think 18 years old, 19, just really kind of shaped my trajectory. So sorry for kind of a long-winded answer there.
Reena, would you like to go next?
Sure, and wow, thank you for that, Dr. Hadia. That's an incredible anecdote, and it really reminds us all that, you know, even though that was something that happened a while ago, it still affects people to this day, obviously, especially people who have that perspective that you do. So thanks for sharing that. And thanks for everybody, to everybody for joining and for inviting me to this panel. I was kind of semi-joking earlier that I feel like I'm not worthy of being on the same stage as Dr. Hadia and Reverend Leslie, but I'll do my best. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation tonight and hearing those powerful anecdotes. And, you know, when I heard this question, I started to think about what a defining moment meant to me as a mixed person growing up in the US, daughter of an immigrant on one side, daughter of a third, fourth generation American on another. And I will say that when you are in a position where I am, where you are so mixed, again, my father is from South Asia. My mother was sort of like Irish, German, Eastern European mix, two different religions, two different upbringings, both spoke English, but my father is trilingual because of where he was raised in India. So, you know, a lot of things kind of come together when you're a kid that make you start to realize that maybe you're a little bit different, right? And I actually grew up mostly in Amish country, Ohio, believe it or not. We were one of the few brown families in the area in the mid 80s, early 90s. And my dad was definitely one of the only brown people in the whole area. So one thing I remember though is when I was growing up in Amish country, you would think that in a predominantly white Christian society, we might have faced some racism or we might have faced, you know, discrimination in some way, but we were very welcomed in that community. And I remember being in school and never feeling different, never feeling like we were from somewhere else, etc. And it actually was not until we moved to the suburbs of Cleveland where somebody kind of pointed out that I wasn't like all the other, you know, white kids of homogenous heritage. And I was like, what do you mean? And I remember one day I was 8 or 9 years old. My dad normally worked all the time. He's a physician, so he was constantly in the hospital or, you know, helping people, etc. So my dad one day picked me up after school because we were going to a basketball game, Cavs game, which was something we did a lot when I was a kid. And I remember one of my classmates looked at my dad, who's much darker complected than I am, and he was like, "Who's that?" I said, "It's my dad." He's like, "That's your dad?" "Yeah, that's my dad." I'm like, "What do you mean that's my dad?" And he's like, "Oh." And that was the first time it kind of clicked in my mind, like, huh, I don't really look like my dad. Interesting. Like I never thought about it before because nobody ever pointed it out. And so that was kind of one moment for me as a child that I was thinking, okay, if that's different, if his skin color is different, what else might be different? And in our household growing up, we never had a conversation with my parents about their different religions or their different ethnic backgrounds. They just assimilated to one another so well that there didn't seem to be any conversation to be had. I mean, for us, it was quote unquote, whatever you want to say normal is, right? Like we would do things with my Indian family and my Indian friends, and it was like normal. And then we would go off to New York City and visit my grandparents and go eat cannoli on Myrtle Avenue in Queens, and that was normal. So we never had any sort of distinction growing up. And I remember that moment being the time when I started to question, and it sort of followed me a little bit into later years of my life. And it wasn't until I got to college when I was at Syracuse where I was surrounded by a lot more diversity, ethnically, religiously, etc., where I started to kind of feel like my Indian identity almost wasn't enough, if you will, because I wasn't full Indian, I was half Indian. And that's, you know, I hope we get to a whole conversation about identity kind of later on in this talk. But that was kind of when another moment happened where I realized that, you know, maybe I wasn't Hindu enough. Maybe I didn't know enough about Hinduism, because the kids who had come from India to study at Syracuse, you know, would kind of make me feel like I didn't know enough about that religion. So that was like another defining moment where I thought, huh, so I'm different again from something else. So anyway, I know that's sort of a long-winded piece too. And I just, like I said, I'm really happy to be here, and I hope we can expand on these topics as we move on in the conversation. So I'll pass it back to you guys.
And Reverend Leslie, if you would like to touch on it.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Thanks again for the invite and for the fellowship. My story is coming from a different place. Actually, I was 10 and a pre-K, preacher's kid in the Black church, and pretty quiet, and was full of trauma already, 10 years old. And if you saw a pew, you probably would walk by it, but I would be sitting right there in the corner. So I was that kid that you would miss because I never spoke. I was pretty quiet, pretty timid, you know, nervous, anxious all the time, understandably. And so a very powerful moment in my experience was the choir director at the church asked my mom if she could take me for popcorn. And I'm like, oh, sure, popcorn. What kid doesn't like popcorn? But she said, wait, let's stop in here for a second. So we went into this rec center or community center. And she said, well, go stand in that line. You got to sign up for the popcorn. And I had to give them all this information. I didn't understand why I had to do all this interviewing. It's like popcorn. And I was like, well, where's the popcorn? And so we left the center. She said, I'm so proud of you. I said, for what? She said, you just signed up for your first pageant. I was like, what? Where's the popcorn? So popcorn was just a way to get me to go with her to sign up for this pageant. She actually enrolled me in a multicultural pageant, and I was terrified, of course, because I didn't think, oh my God, I'm not gonna do a pageant. I'm not gonna dance and sing and do all of that. No, not me. Because I'm the kid who in church, in Black church, you know, when there's an Easter program or a Christmas program, you have to say a little speech or what have you. I'm the kid who would start and then cry and run off the stage. But she really affirmed me and really walked with me. Instead of a song or a dance or an instrumental performance or piano performance, she gave me a poem that she wanted me to recite called I Am the Black Child. And so little did I know I had a knack for reciting things and writing things. And so I recited the poem, and in doing the Q&A segment of the pageant, which is what is pretty standard, they were pretty impressed with my answers. They were pretty insightful for my age. And I won first runner-up. So there's the winner, who I thought got a pass because her mom was a judge. But anyway, I was first runner-up to her, and I never won anything in my life. I never even thought of being a part of anything so big, right? But it really warmed my heart that she saw me, because the trauma had told me at the time that I should stay invisible, you know? And with all of these people around me who should have seen me, including my own mother, she saw me, and she saw something creative in me and encouraged it. And I found out later that my mother actually was on board with the idea. But it warmed my heart so much that she thought that I was worthy enough to have something to offer. And then I won first runner-up. So here are 5, 7, 8 other girls with their satin dresses and all these pretty roses in their hair, doing their piano recitals and the instruments. And I'm in my blue calico dress that we got from the Goodwill, because that's all we could afford, with my donated gloves, and I won first runner-up. And I felt so special. And so I thought, wow, maybe I can be something. And when I got older, I always reflect back to that moment, because I want to be the woman that pours into other little girls and boys like that. So she changed my life and opened up a well of creativity in me. And once she opened it, it never closed. And so that was 4th grade. And it just really helped me find a place to pour my trauma into, because the trauma had not stopped, actually. But I was able to channel it and channel what I was feeling through a creative lens, and I still do. And so I'm thankful for her opening that door, unlocking that door in me. And it inspired me to eventually become a teacher and to do the work that I do now, because I want to continue to unlock doors. And not only children, but anybody that I come across. So yeah, there it is.
Okay, thank you so much. For our next question, as women who often challenge the norms, how do you approach members of your own religion who disagree with your work or disagree with you in general? Oh, and why don't we start? Reena, could you take that?
Sure. So that kind of actually leads into what I started talking about at the end of my last response. Again, I grew up in a Catholic/Hindu household, and I would go to church literally every Sunday with my mom from the time I was probably really from the time I was born until I was maybe 9 or 10 years old, and we moved, and she, you know, changed community affiliation. But we grew up with that Catholic upbringing. And then for those who are not familiar really with how Hinduism works, you do have temples and whatnot that you can go to and have a sense of community, but it's mostly something you practice at home amongst your family. And so it's more of like a personal, what path does my family take, as opposed to what is the temple telling me to do. So it's two different yet the same schools of thought, if you will, because they're both kind of going to the same place. But it's different sort of ideology around how you practice. And so when I got to college, I really wanted to branch out and learn more about my Hindu side of things, because I had always gone to these family functions and, you know, had been part of these different ceremonies, but I didn't really know what they meant, because, you know, obviously I don't speak the language and it's very ancient and whatnot. And so I would try to kind of pick up what was happening, but it's very difficult if you didn't, you know, if you weren't raised and educated in it in the way that I wished I had been. More I was on the periphery, I felt. So we had a group at school called the Hindu Students Association, and I thought, this is great. I'm going to join this group, and I'm going to learn more, and I'm going to make all these friends, and I'm going to be included. And I was really, really excited about it. And when I got to the club, it was fantastic. I did meet some great people, some people I still speak to this day. But there was like always this sense from other people in the group that I wasn't like Hindu enough. First of all, they didn't think I was Indian at all. Most people have no idea what I am racially. So it's always like a fun game to see what they guess, right? So they were kind of wondering, like looking at me like, why is she here? You know, who knows what she is? And then as I explained my background and my story, they were like, oh, okay, so you're mixed, understood. And I remember having this moment where I was feeling a little bit sort of defensive already without having actually done or said anything, just because of the feeling I was getting from people in this group who maybe didn't think that I was as, you know, devoted as them or whatever it was. So, you know, I got to know more people, and I was just being myself, being friendly, being open, conversational. And eventually the next year, my sophomore year, I ended up getting elected the president of the Hindu Students Association, still not knowing a ton about Hinduism myself, to be completely honest. And I remember I made this really big mistake that I still think about to this day sometimes, which, you know, it shouldn't really matter, but it's just one of those things that you cringe about. So generally in Hinduism, when you're doing a prayer ceremony with your fellow worshipers, you don't like eat or drink anything. You do the ceremony and then you do it after. Well, I wasn't thinking about that. I was thinking about our prayer ceremony as more of a social thing. So when everybody showed up, all these kids from India, I had like all these snacks out and drinks, because I was like, we're going to make it like a party. And usually when you grow up in Indian culture, the first thing you do when someone even just enters your home is you offer them a drink. You're like, oh, would you like something to drink? Would you like something to eat? You know, whatever. So I was using that cultural mentality toward this religious experience. And I remember, like, as soon as people would come in, I would say, oh, do you want, here we have like food, drink, please help yourselves. And everybody was looking at me a little funny and just kind of moved on. And this one guy was like, well, you know, like, you're not supposed to eat before you pray. And I was like, what? Like, I didn't know that. Oh my goodness. And it was such a silly move. And I think since that moment, there was always this thought that I, you know, wasn't fit to be in the club. But I wasn't there to push anything on anyone. I was there to learn. I was there to be part of something and explore that side of my culture outside of my family. And it just seemed very, you know, tense in that way, which was sort of a bummer, because I wanted to continue being in that group. But I ended up kind of finding my place somewhere else, and learning more about myself in different ways. And that was sort of one thing. I know it's not really like having, you know, published a work that's controversial or, you know, having a new philosophy, but it was one of those things where I wanted to be included and I wanted to be part of this. And I thought I had enough based on what I had grown up with, and others just thought it wasn't. And so that was kind of a defining moment too, of just thinking like, okay, what is spirituality and what is religion, right? That sparked a whole different conversation that I've had with myself for years and years and years. And again, I'm a big proponent of not pushing things on people. And I know that there are faiths that, you know, spreading the word is a really important part of the faith. And I respect that completely. I personally would say that for me, I'm certainly spiritual. And I think that spirituality is something that's very personal and within your heart. And if you don't feel it, you're not going to be it, right? And so I think those kind of interactions that I had as, you know, trying to be more involved as a Hindu really shaped that perspective of me, because I had sort of come away from this, you know, fully Catholic upbringing, or, you know, mostly Catholic upbringing. And I was trying to explore a little more on this side. And then I just kind of realized, like, maybe I am more spiritual than I am religious. And maybe I don't know all of the different, you know, all of the different moves and the different prayers and the different, you know, rules, but I believe that there's something out there. And I believe that there is, you know, there's something in the universe that's a higher power than me. So maybe that's the road I need to take. And so since then, I've really been, I think, more of a spiritual person, because I had some of that pushback. And I thought to myself, well, what does that mean for my life and what I really feel? So that's kind of where I am now, I guess, if that's a good answer for you, Allison and Rose.
Yes, thank you. Reverend Leslie, would you like to hop on next?
Well, now, as we sisters say sometimes, let me get comfortable. Okay, so I grew up, as I said before, preacher's kid in the Black church. And, you know, in the Black church, there are some do's and some don'ts. And one of the don'ts is don't be gay, because you're going to hell. You're going to burn like a French fry. So all my life I've been hearing this, and it's an abomination because the Bible says, and it's always the Bible says, and the Bible says, right? It's never really what Jesus says, right? Go figure, right? Because he never said anything anyway. Let me get back to what I'm saying. So I grew up terrified of gay people, right? Like they were all around me in my neighborhood, and I'd be like, oh, if I say hi, I'm gonna fry like that French fry over there. So grew up with this whole mindset about gay people, right? And so I found myself having a crush on Lynette Woodard. She's a basketball player, first woman to play in the Globetrotters. And I was like, oh no, I'm gonna die like a French fry. I'm gonna fry, burnt to a crisp. Secret's going to the grave with me, not telling a soul. No, I'm not. And so it so happens that my younger sister came out by this. She's 3 years my junior. I said, oh no, my mother took a whole vacation for that one. I said, I'm never saying a thing, because, you know. But as I got through college and began to become more comfortable with myself, I just couldn't bear holding the weight of that secret, right? And so eventually my mom outed me herself, and, you know, she had her adjustments, but she was pretty affirming. And so she's a pre-K, and she's an evangelist. My grandmother's a pastor, my brother's a pastor. So as I'm finishing up college, I'm feeling a call to the ministry, and I'm like, oh no, what do I do? But the call can't be denied. And so I answered the call and I began ministry. But I start my ministry in a church that affirms lesbians and gays. And so my mom's like, what is that? What is a gay? What? A gay church? Is that a thing? You're pulling my leg, right? I said, no, I'm not. God loves us just the way we are, Mom. And so she came around, and so I began my work with the Unity Fellowship Church Movement. It's the first African-American denomination that affirms lesbian, gays, LGBTQIA family. And so as I begin working in this denomination and learning different things, I get drawn to the outreach work that I saw her do, right? And so as I'm engaging in this work with different organizations, some churches jump on the bandwagon with us. And so I've always been very authentic and very committed to being my real authentic womanist self. Before I even knew what that was, I was all into that before Alice Walker coined it, womanist, right? And so I'm going to bring my authenticity to the table. So as we got into conversations with people from different churches, particularly male preachers from different churches, I was already getting a side eye because I'm female and I'm being treated like I'm out of place somehow. I don't know how that happened. I don't know how they thought that, but I had the nerve to be out. I had the nerve to be out of the closet. Why would I do that? Why can't I just be gay in the house? There's no fun in that. Plus, that's not how it goes. That's not how it works. So I would get a lot of pushback for being authentic and being out. But all I think about is there are boys and girls all around me who need a light. Because I could not find many brave lights as I was coming out, right? And so it was important to me to be a light to those who needed it. Because some people will not read a sacred text. They're going to read your life. And what do I say to my own child if I'm not being authentic, right? I'm modeling life for a young human being or human beings around me. It was important to me to be authentic. So I had to endure many battles, many discussions that most of the time I just listen because I'm not arguing with you. I'm not defending or asking for approval or permission because I don't have to. I'm not about to go through the 66 books that were selected and go back and forth slapping scriptures. I'm not doing that. Can we get together on the work at hand? Can we feed the man a sandwich? Do you have to talk to me about how I'm going to hell? That is not the topic of the day. We are here to feed the man a sandwich. Can we do that work, please? And I'm not going to dignify any of that rhetoric with a response anyway. So authenticity got me in a lot of battles, got me in a lot of rooms where people were clearly uncomfortable. But their discomfort is their journey, it's not mine. And so I was intentional about just being authentic, not having to say it, declare it, demand it, hold up a sign, but just being present authentically. Because as far as I know, there could be a soul or someone in the room that needed me to show up that way. And that's why I show up as my Black woman, sister, homegirl from the project self who loves her partner of 17 years and does not have to prove a thing. I love God. I love God. I love God. And my life is a gift back to you, humanity, from the God that gave it to me. And I was going to say something else. I wish I would hide something. I wish I would. My ancestors have been through way too much. All my ancestors, my Black ones and my lesbian ones, they've been through too much for me to be shrinking and dimming my light because someone else is uncomfortable. Someone's counting on me to be a light and be an authentic light. So that's exactly what I'm going to do because I've suffered enough. Time out for that. So that's my story. That's it. Yeah.
Thank you, Reverend Oliver. Yes. Dr. Hadia Mubarak, could you speak?
Yeah, that was so inspirational. So I'm not sure how I'm gonna follow that, but I really love what you said about authenticity and being true to oneself, and that really resonates very much with me as well. So to your question about how do I handle people who disagree with me within my own faith tradition. So this is a very difficult question for many reasons. One of which, so a lot of Muslims I come across, not all, right? And I'm always talking about the fact that religious communities are not monolithic, and there are so many different factors that shape the way we, so many aspects of our lives. What we think about gender roles, for example, what we think of female, proper decorum, and all of these things. It's not just religion or a religious text. There's so many other factors at play: education, family, culture. And so one of, I guess, the never-ending battles for me as a Muslim woman has been fighting the patriarchy and misogyny within my own community. And so it's difficult on one hand to say this, right? So kind of honestly and transparently, and I'll tell you why. I mean, I think what adds complexity to this whole, to having internal, I guess, open conversation about it within the Muslim community, just as, for example, having an open conversation about racism, which is something that a lot of Muslim Americans are trying to push for, right? Because it's a conversation that needs to be had. One of the reasons is that in the West, the Muslim community as a religious minority has had the sense of being besieged, or this sense of beleaguerment. And when a community feels that way, when a community feels besieged, defenses go up. And when defenses go up, it becomes difficult to kind of critique your own, right, in a way that's very open and honest and transparent. And this is the reality that Muslims in America specifically find themselves in, because on one hand, you are fighting against centuries of very negative portrayals of Islam and Muslims through kind of Orientalist ideas of the Muslim man as, you know, inherently violent and sexually depraved. You know, you look at films back from like the 1920s, the Sheikh, these Valentino films, the son of the Sheikh, right? And this kind of this idea of the Arab man with his harem of women, right? So you have these like stereotypes that have been entrenched in our society for so long that Muslims in America naturally want to kind of, I guess, portray a positive image, right? But on the other hand, we have problems, like every community has its problems, and we have the problem of misogyny and patriarchy. And so where do these ideas stem from? You know, in my humble opinion, they are completely misaligned with the primary text, the way I read the primary text. And I'm very grateful to my parents for having put me in a Muslim school for 8 years of my life, although I did not like it from 1st to 8th grade. And, you know, but I learned Arabic, and that was so critical for my own religious empowerment, because I never had to depend on a man to tell me what the Quran said or what the Prophet said. And I have so many stories I can share with you of arguing with religious clerics in Saudi Arabia, in Jordan. So I'll just give you, I guess, one anecdote. I was in Jordan one summer. My mom is from Jordan, and my grandparents live in Amman, which is the capital of Jordan, and there's a mosque right across the street. So every time I'd hear the call to prayer, and if you've been to a Muslim country, you will hear the call to prayer 5 times a day. It's beautiful, in my opinion. It's a beautiful call, and I was excited. You know, I wanted to go pray with everyone else. And when I was a kid, I remember my grandfather taking me with him, and it wasn't an issue. But as I got older, I realized there's this thing called the women's section of the mosque. And then I found out one summer I was there, the women's section was closed, and it just stayed closed. And I was like, okay, where am I supposed to pray? And I don't know, I might have been like 17, 18, so I wasn't comfortable going into this mosque full of men, so I would pray in this corner. And I eventually just told this guy who worked there, I said, can you talk to the imam? I'm a visitor from the United States. I'd love to pray, you know, in a decent place. And can you just tell him to open the women's prayer, the women's prayer area? And so he said, sure, I'll talk to him. Well, the funny thing is that imam I'm still there. I wait for all the men to leave. I'm hiding in this corner because it's intimidating for me. You know, it's still, even though it's my mother's native country, it's still a foreign country for me. And although I'm fluent in Arabic, I'm not, they can tell I'm not from there. Like as soon as I start speaking, they know I'm not from the country. That's one of the first things. I mean, my Arabic gives it away. One of the first questions I'll get is, where are you from? They look at me really confused because I look ethnically Arab, but I don't sound like, you know, like a native Jordanian. And so I waited for all the men to come out, and I kind of, like, I think I was hiding behind this bookcase just so I wouldn't attract too much attention. And then I hear the guy talking to the imam, and he tells him, there's this young lady, can you open the women's area for her? And I hear the imam being really dismissive and saying, no, we're not opening it. So I come out from behind this bookcase, and I explain to him my situation, and he tells me, well, you know, a woman should pray in her home. And I was flabbergasted. And I told him, did you know that the Prophet said, and I told him this prophetic tradition called a hadith in Arabic. And I told him, the Prophet said, do not deny the female servants of God the houses of God. Like, you're not allowed religiously to deny women access to the mosque. And I said that to him in Arabic, and he just stayed quiet. And he was really surprised that I could even quote this tradition, this prophetic tradition, this hadith. And so he did end up opening the women's prayer area and kind of being more welcoming to the mosque. But this is just one kind of anecdote of I guess to make a long story short, I really believe that religious literacy is so critical to fight back against religious patriarchy, because you have to fight it on its own terms, and you have to be able to quote the religious text and use that framework to demonstrate that this is wrong, this is inconsistent, this is not divine intent, this is just a misogynist interpretation that men have, you know, kind of upheld for a few centuries, but that doesn't make it right. So again, sorry for my long-winded answers.
Thank you guys for sharing. Those are beautiful words. At this time, I'll ask anyone in the virtual audience, if you have any questions for our panelists, go ahead and put them in the chat. And then I will pass it to Matilde Sanchez, who is one of our members of ILC, to ask another question.
Hi guys, thank you guys for joining. My question is, can you talk about one of the spiritual leaders and mentors that have inspired you? And we can start with Reverend Matthew, if you'd like to.
Well, let's see. Spiritual leaders, there are many people that impacted me, but I'd have to say the spiritual leader that really inspired me was my first pastor in the Unity Fellowship Church movement. Her name is Bishop Jacqueline Holland. Now, I was, like I said, authentic and all that. She really inspired me because even in this non-denominational affirming movement, she dealt with a great deal of sexism in the gay community. And I would see her battle to lead different conferences and things of that nature. And I was under her leadership at the time. And I remember myself saying, wow, why does she have to deal with that? This is an affirming movement and we still have discrimination, but she fought and she pressed, and she eventually became the first female bishop in our denomination, and one of the first openly gay female bishops in the nation. But I remember all those times where she fought to be in the room to have conversations about what's important for women and what's important to talk about for women and for Black women and for little girls, that our voices needed to be heard. I admired that about her, that she stuck it through, because she could have quit, she could have just given up and just walked away from it, but she pressed so that women like me would not have to fight as hard. And I remember when she became bishop, a few years later, I became the first national minister of music. And I faced some of that same discrimination because there were men in the organization that felt like they were entitled to the position just because they were male. I was doing the work. I worked my way to this position and earned it righteously. And so because she stood up for herself in the rooms of power, I was encouraged to stand up for myself in the rooms of power, and to stand up for what I deserved. And it gained me a lot of respect. And so Bishop Jacqueline Holland from the Unity Fellowship Church movement was very influential in me remaining authentic and owning my voice as a leader.
Thank you. Reena, would you like to go next?
Sure. And I know this is going to sound like a cop-out answer, but it really is true. I am fascinated by the Dalai Lama and all of his teachings around sort of what makes sense, right? And, you know, both Dr. Hadia and Reverend Leslie had great points about, you know, literacy, you know, being religiously literate, and also questioning, you know, why are you judging me when I'm here to serve God? I mean, that makes sense, right? Like, that's logical when you think about your spirituality. And what I love about the Dalai Lama is anytime you read any kind of, you know, whether it's like a little quote he puts out there or the books that, you know, like Joey had us read a book with him and Desmond Tutu, and the title escapes me, but just the conversation between those two men, for example, about, you know, what we as human beings can do to be more authentic and be more understanding of one another. You know, we create so many problems of our own making for no reason, right? And it's because someone's racist, someone's uneducated and ignorant and believes certain things, someone was misinformed about something, somebody wants more than they really need to have. And it's like, we are the making of our own problems a lot of times. And so how can we use our spirituality and our understanding of ourselves and one another to improve our lives? And that is really what grabs me about him and his teachings. And so I can't say that I've really had anybody personally who's affected me, but again, I love reading anything about the Dalai Lama, and you know, Buddhism and Hinduism have a lot of similarities because, as you might know, the first Buddha was actually a Hindu, Siddhartha Gautama. He was Hindu first. So there's a lot of crossover there, right? And there's a lot of sort of similar philosophy. So that also really strikes me. So I would say if you ever have a chance to just like follow the Dalai Lama on Facebook or Twitter or whatever the kids are using these days, TikTok. I don't know if he's on TikTok, but that's where all the kids are, I guess. I'm not, but I used to be cool, guys, really. But anyway, just, you know, follow him somewhere and see like just these little pieces he puts out every day. And you're just like, wow, that is so right. And it really hits you, I think, no matter what faith from which you originated. So for that, I would say, you know, that's been my biggest influence spiritually if we're talking about a person.
Thank you for sharing. Dr. Mubarak.
So I did mention I attended an Islamic school for 8 years of my life. And even though I met a lot of inspirational people there, I would say that Islam was kind of taught to me, you know, at least in the school, in a sort of dry way. It was more about the do's and don'ts of religion. And it really wasn't until the summer of 2003, I was I can't remember what year in college I was, but I think it was the end of I think I had just graduated actually college and then my undergrad. And I went to Jordan. And so I visited Jordan regularly, even though my dad's side's Syrian, but my dad could never go back to Syria. He's basically been an exile from, you know, and his father was an exile before he was, you know, being someone who had been politically engaged in Syria. My grandfather from my dad's side, who's Syrian, basically lived in Sudan and was a professor in Sudan for a good percentage of his life, and then in Saudi Arabia. But then anyway, my dad came to the US in 1979 and couldn't go back. So we would visit my mom's family in Jordan, and then my dad's family that was still in Syria would meet us in Jordan. That was sort of the meeting spot. Anyway, so that summer in 2003, I met a religious scholar. First I enrolled in an Arabic institute there. And while I was there in the same neighborhood, my friends from my Arabic class were like, come with us. And it was the first time I met this scholar who was more trained in the kind of the mystical, spiritual dimensions of Islam. And it felt like the first time I heard anyone talking about God. You know, it was, and back to Reverend Leslie's point, you know, even though I had went to this Muslim school, but it was always about Islam this, Islam that. And I was like, where is God in this equation? And so when I attended these classes, it was so liberating, and it was just so spiritual, and it really resonated with me on a very deep level. I would say those classes changed my life in many ways because it really made religion about your direct relationship with God, and it wasn't about everyone else anymore. And it was about, you know, and those are the people, you know, those are the type of people who have inspired me throughout my life. It's people who talk about faith in a way that's talk about truths that are transcendental, that basically resonate with every human being, regardless of your ethnic identity, your religious identity, your gender, your sexuality, right? There are certain truths that I think we can all relate to. This idea of living life, recognizing your accountability to God, recognizing the importance of sincerity, the importance of being introspective. And that was another thing that this mentor, I think, really helped me with, this idea of being introspective, right? And always looking within and trying to recognize one's internal flaws and weaknesses, and working on that, working on purging ill thoughts and ill feelings, and getting rid of vices, the vices of the ego, right? Like arrogance and selfishness and greed and jealousy and all of these things. And so he had really introduced me to another dimension of Islam that I think is sort of neglected in many parts of the Muslim world, which is really looking at the heart, right? And changing oneself from within rather than trying to change everyone around you. And I truly believe that this is where change must begin. It must begin from within, right? Because we can only change ourselves.
Thank you for sharing. We got one question in the chat. Someone asked if you have any books or podcasts that you recommend for them to listen or read. And we can start with Reverend Leslie.
So many books in my library. I really need to like sort of do them. One book that I always read is going to make sense when I say it, but I go back to it every now and again, and it is called The Artist's Way. And it's a creative way of looking at your spiritual path. And it gives you little, assignments to do, and take yourself on a date, and shows you the different ways that you can commit to really tapping into that creative force where it meets the spiritual force. Because I believe at the end of the day that we all have a spiritual path that we're on, and there's a current of creativity that walks right along with that. So I would definitely say The Artist's Way. Don't even think about, I'm not an artist. Yes, you are. Everyone is. Don't even think about that word. Just think about it. And it's a workbook that really will open you up and make you feel really confident and comfortable with all of the wonderment that God has deposited in you. So yeah, The Artist's Way.
Thank you. I was going to ask. Dr. Mubarak, would you like to go next?
This is kind of difficult. I haven't thought about it, but I would say I love Rumi's poetry. If you've read any of Rumi's poetry, so there's a bunch of different collections by him. There's one that I recently came out. It's a rendition of some of his works. It's called The Rumi Prescription. And I haven't read the whole thing, but what I've read seemed really inspirational. Yeah, I mean, I think so. Those would be the works I'd recommend for the Muslim tradition. I mean, I'm not exactly sure. I mean, if you want to learn about Islam, there's a few other books I'd recommend. One of which I would really recommend The Story of the Quran by Ingrid Mattson as a kind of to learn about a little bit about the Muslim tradition. I'd also recommend what's the name of the book? Who Speaks for Islam by John Esposito and Dalia Mugahid. So those are kind of like if you want to learn a little bit about the Muslim faith and Muslims' views about things, I would recommend that book. And then lastly, the book Allison and Zach in their class are reading, Do Muslim Women Need Saving? That's one of my favorites by Laila Abu Ghazal.
Thank you. Would you be able to put those books in the chat? Okay. Reena?
Yeah, I would love to know be reminded of those books too. So thank you for those. So as I was talking about the Dalai Lama and the Book of Joy, thank you for those of you who reminded me of the title in the chat. I read a book of his a few years ago called How to See Yourself as You Really Are. And I think it's an incredible read for anybody who is sort of like lost or feeling conflicted about who they are and what they can contribute to the world. And again, it's more from a spiritual perspective and our humanities understanding. And I was actually looking up the introduction of the book because it was so powerful to me when I read it, and then like going into those details. So I just want to read it to you all really quickly to give you an idea of what this book is about. So he says, I hope you share my concern about the present worldwide moral crisis and that you will join me in calling on all humanitarians and religious practitioners who share this concern to contribute to making our societies more compassionate, just, and equitable. I say this not as a Buddhist or even as a Tibetan, but simply as a human being. I also do not speak as an expert on politics, but as a part of the Buddhist tradition, which, like the traditions of other great world religions, is founded on the bedrock of concern for all beings. From this perspective, I will share with you the following personal beliefs. 1, the universal concern is essential to solving global problems. 2, love and compassion are the pillars of world peace. 3, All world religions seek to advance world peace, as do all humanitarians of whatever ideology. And for each individual has a responsibility to shape institutions to serve the needs of the world. So then he goes through those 4 pillars throughout the book, and it just makes you think, again, going back to sort of the logic of faith, right? Like, what have we been told our whole lives, and what have we sort of been led to believe on these different paths that we've had? And then, as you know, I think it's fair to say that those of us who are in this conversation right now are critical thinkers, or we wouldn't be here, right? So what, as a critical thinker, can I take in and continue to learn as a person to really advance not just, you know, my own sense of self, but also the well-being of others? And so I really love this book. Again, it's called How to See Yourself as You Really Are, Dalai Lama. And it's so quick to read, and it just absorbs right into you, that I highly recommend that as something to sort of explore spirituality and the greater good.
Thank you. Okay, we have one final question, and I'm going to hand it off to Zach to ask before we wrap up.
Thank you all. So this is the last question. So what are your hopes for the future? And we can start with Reena.
Oh, that's a great question, a loaded question. I mean, I think, and you know, again, this kind of comes from my own mixed upbringing, and feeling like I've seen progress throughout my life when it comes to those of us in a community that, you know, see ourselves in different, through different ethnicities, through different lenses, etc. And my biggest hope is that someday that will be seen as the norm, if you will. And I'll give you an example. I don't know if you guys recall, but back in, I think it was 2013 or 2014, Cheerios aired a commercial with a mixed race couple. And it was like the first time in my life I ever saw something in mass media that looked like my family. And I was like, oh my goodness, that girl looks like me. Oh my goodness, her parents are mixed. Oh my goodness, this is amazing. And I thought it was going to raise the dialogue around mixed couples. Of course, it met all this backlash from people who don't think that couples can be mixed and don't think that you can have a child that's more than one race. And it was like the funniest thing to me, funny in a, you know, not haha funny, but funny like what, that people were pushing back against this commercial that's a reality for so many of us, right, who grew up in that way. And I just do remember the dialogue around it. And now, like, when you see commercials, how many of them have like mixed families? Almost all of them, right? And that's within a 7-year window. It went from me not seeing anything for the first 30 years of my life, because I turned 30 in 2013. So again, that dates me. For the first 30 years of my life, never seeing a mixed couple anywhere in like movies or TV or commercials or advertising, to like this last 7 years of that just expanding. And I use the term, the example of ethnicity and race to kind of pivot to the fact that, you know, I hope that eventually that becomes sort of just average. We just see couples for who they are, families for who they are, but then we also respect people's religions for what they are, and we allow ourselves to have a dialogue around them, as opposed to trying to push, well, this is how it is because that's what it says, and this is what I think, and this is who told me this. And I feel like with upcoming generations, you know, people are questioning a lot more these days than they would have in the past. And so eventually I would just love to be in a place where we all accept each other for who we are, and we're cool with, hey, as long as you're not hurting anyone, you're fine by me. As long as you're not being a bigot and making someone's life a living heck for no reason, you're cool with me. Like, that's how I wish it would end up being someday. And I hope, as I've seen the progress throughout my life, I'm hoping that we get there eventually.
Thank you for sharing. Dr. Mubarak, would you like to go next?
I guess my hope for the future is that we can just love each other, and I think the world needs a lot more love, and love is something that's, I guess, you know, that just transcends all boundaries, right? And just to kind of recognize the commonality of our, you know, humanity, and how similar we all are at the end of the day, and just to look beyond our differences. There's a prophetic tradition that states, none of you believes until you love for your brother what you love for yourself. And so the way I understand this tradition is that, you know, faith can't just be abstract. You can't, it's not just in the heart, but it has to be realized in the way we treat one another. And that, you know, if my faith does not make me a better global citizen and doesn't make me treat people better and be a better person, then really I have to ask myself, what is my faith worth at the end of the day? So that's what I would conclude with.
Thank you. And lastly, Reverend Leslie.
Well, I would like to see the external adjective take a back seat. So the external adjective, like we've heard a few of them tonight. Can you just get to know Leslie? She a pretty cool chick. She a lot of fun. You know, she can hold a pretty good conversation, laugh and all that, and do a lot of other things. Can you just get to know her? Can we just get to know people? Can we just chill? Maybe with or without Netflix, but can you just get to know me? Can I just get to know you? Can we have a meal? Can we like bowl together? Can our kids like do the whatever the dance will be whenever that happens? I would like to see the external, I was gonna say have the external adjective eliminated, but we can't eliminate the beauty of our adjectives, right? But can we not lead with them? Can we get to a place where we don't have to, where I don't have to say Black woman, lesbian, gay? Can I get to a place where I can just see you and you can see me? Can we get there? And just live from there? Can we work from there? Can we serve from there? Can we heal from there? Can we talk from there? Because guess what? When the babies see babies, they don't lead with adjectives. They wave and they hug. And pretty much until we tell them, because we tell kids stuff in our houses. We tell them by the way we respond to each other. We tell them with our stares. We tell them with our comments, our jokes at Thanksgiving and Christmas. And we tell them when our doors are closed and they're supposed to be in the bed, but they're really listening at the door. We tell them with the way we treat people. We tell them what the adjectives are. So that's why some of them are shell shocked, some of them cringe. Can we just live without the adjectives in the front? It'd be great if you just say, oh, I'm glad I discovered that special thing about you, as opposed to, you know, putting a label on you. So I imagine a world where the adjectives don't lead, love leads, and just getting to know people leads. That is like a dream. And I probably won't live to see it, or maybe I will. I have some hope. I have a little bit of hope. And even if I don't live to see it, I imagine that for the world, because that's what we need. Yeah.
Thank you, Reverend Oliver, for those wonderful words to end on, and a beautiful hope that I think we all wish to see. And thank you so much to our other panelists, Reena and Dr. Hadia, Dr. Mubarak. Like, thank you so much for all of your insights. I mean, it's been, I think I speak for everyone when I say it's been a truly enlightening and powerful experience hearing from you. And as a thank you, we will be preparing, and you guys will be getting in the next few weeks, a little gift from us that has a t-shirt, our Embrace the Difference t-shirt from ILC for Presbyterian and Pluralist Week. So that we thank you so much for being here and sharing with us. And thank you everyone for attending and making this a great program. And